go. Okay, and ready. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sonic Talk number 272. This is going live today, Wednesday what is the date today? Wednesday the 20th of June, and we have a number of people in the live chat room. If you've never visited the live chat room before and you're watching this or listening to this recorded, please come to sonicstate.com/live, where there's a live video stream, and there's also a chat room where you can participate and have your views known and just kind of chip in. And like I say, it's the chat room is our large turbo brain, where it can pick up the stuff that falls through the large holes. It's certainly in my knowledge anyway. I can't speak for the rest of the panel, who are extremely knowledgeable. And this week's a little bit different because we've got actually a sort of special guest in the form of Mr. Ethan Weiner. In fact, I'm just going to pause that 1 second because I realise I haven't done, Ethan, a lower third for you, and I'm going to do that right away because I don't want you to lose out on the beautiful audio-visual delight that is the lower third. Right, so there we are. There's my edit point. So, Ethan, how the devil are you? Well, first of all, Ethan is based in the States, not too far away from where Rich Hilton is, a regular guest on the show. And he's just written a book, or just released a book, called The Audio Expert, Everything You Need to Know About Audio. So, Ethan, how are you?
I'm great, thanks.
Thank you very much for joining us today, and also for setting up Skype, especially for us. And I notice we haven't got video for you, but we've got a nice quality audio. So perhaps first of all, we could start by, you could tell us what your signal path is. It's something I like to quiz our guests about from time to time. So let's have that right away, if you don't mind.
Signal path, you mean how am I getting
how are you getting in?
The internet? Well, I just have a plain old DSL connection. It's the fastest one they offer, in the switching boxes right up at the end of my street, so I can get a pretty fast connection. I had cable internet before, and I hate my cable company. Probably everybody hates their cable company, but I really hate my cable company. And I refuse to give them any of my business if I can avoid it.
What about audio signal path? How are you getting in that way?
Well, I have an Audio Technica 4033. I bought the first one when they first came out, and I think I paid $650 for it. And this was a number of years ago. I forget exactly how long, 15, whenever they first came out with that microphone. And I wanted to get a high quality microphone. And I've had good stuff in the past when I used to be involved in professional audio and owned a recording studio, and then kind of got out of that and took a detour into software development and some other stuff for a number of years. And when I got back in, I started playing the cello. This was in the early 90s, and set up a recording setup again in my home, and wanted to get a good microphone. And I had a relationship with a local retailer, and I borrowed from them on spec. I told them I'll buy one of these, and I got a 4033, a Neumann U87, and an AKG 414. And I had my cello teacher come over, and we recorded both of us playing her cello and my cello. And the 4033 was actually the best. And at that time, it was $650. A year later, when they got down to $350, I bought a second one. And again, this was a very long time ago. I think
did they match up? I wonder, was the price reduction, did it give you a decent stereo pair, or was the second one $300 less?
Yeah, it was fine. Yeah. I mean, I never actually measured them side by side or anything, but I've certainly used them for stereo, and it sounds fine. And I've always been happy. And people that know me know that I like and appreciate good stuff, but there's a lot of affordable equipment that's good too.
Absolutely. And, we'll definitely come on to that later. I'm just going to introduce the rest of
Yeah.
our guests, and then we'll get on to the sort of nitty-gritty of your book and some other topics, I hope, as well. So we'll start over there with PJ Tracy, as he's sat there waiting, and he's only recently come to us in video, and it seems a shame not to utilise it. PJ, how you doing? You're back on the SM7A then today?
I am.
Yeah, sounding good. How are you?
Yeah. In honor of Ethan, I have run through my most characterful signal path. So I'm going through the germanium preamplifier today.
Ah, lovely.
With this. Yeah.
So excellent. Well, thanks for joining us, PJ. PJ Tracy Sound, of course, Emmy-winning composer, studio owner, pianist, general man about town, and SM7B enthusiast as well. And germanium nut. I think a recent discovery to that particular element.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Anyway, thanks for joining us also. And we also have Mr. Rich Hilton, who is in Connecticut. Rich, of course, is Nile Rodgers' right-hand guy when it comes to the studio. Also tours with Chic. In fact, we're lucky to have him because he's flitting about all over Europe. Well, coming to UK quite a lot to do various gigs. In fact, I think you were in the UK last week. Is that right, Rich?
Both the last 2 weekends I was in the UK.
Just like to pop over the pond for... can't keep away from the English beer. That's it, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll visit with a few thousand of my closest British friends.
Excellent. Well, nice to have you, Rich. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
So I'm guessing the weather for you is the same for Ethan as well, as you're pretty close geographically, right?
Yes, it's very hot today. This is the first really seriously hot day of the season, I believe. And
yeah, it's been raining for like 6 weeks here, and now suddenly it's got hot, which is kind of cool.
Yes, I know.
Which is kind of
cool. At least
cool.
part of that I know.
Yeah, yes, you know that you've been visiting on the rainy days, unfortunately, which is a shame. And anyway, thanks for joining us, Rich. And also we have Mr. Gaz Williams, who is a bass player, producer, songsurgeon.co.uk is where you can find him. If I find his lower third, no, that's not it at all. It's here. I should know where that fader is by now. Anyway, Gaz, how are you?
Yeah. Good, thank you. Am I loud enough?
Oh, yes, you are. And you're going through your TC Helicon again, right?
Yeah, that's right. I've just been playing around with it. I'm trying to do this thing at the moment where I'm using the MIDI, the MIDI pedal that I've been using recently for the show I've just done, bass to MIDI thing.
Yeah.
But having that controlling the notes of the TC Helicon, so I can sort of play chords on the bass but have like an orchestral sound going on, and I'm singing a choir. And it's wicked. It's amazing. It's like the biggest sound, I think. It's just really odd to be sat playing bass but just having this massive orchestral thing going on, singing this like the Sonic State theme tune. Actually, I should do a cover version of it.
Excellent.
Yeah. So that's why I'm doing this, and I'm just literally just farting around, I think is the right expression. Having lots of fun playing.
Just having a bit of time, a bit of you time. Have you got an Audio Technica 4033 as well? Did you?
I've got 4035 actually, which is similar.
Is that the one I dropped when you brought it over to the?
Yeah,
immediately. That's right. For those who are wondering why, we had a big reunion last time Rich was in the area. We managed to get everybody. We got Rich, we got Mark, we got a bunch of us all in the same room and did a kind of round table thing rather than doing it remotely. And Gaz came over and brought a few mics because I knew we were going to be a bit short. And I proceeded to drop his Audio Technica and
it survived. So
it survived.
That's always a good advert.
So there we go. Obviously, very robust. So anyway, back to Mr. Ethan Weiner. Ethan, your book has just come out, The Audio Expert. I'm just going to flip to a screenshot of of it here. In fact, here's a sort of preview of it on Amazon. It's about $49, I guess.
Yeah.
It's called The Audio Expert: Everything You Need to Know About Audio, and it's kind of would it be fair to say that the idea is for it to be a kind of handbook? I mean, there used to be a similar tome that all audio engineers it was the Audio Engineer Handbook. Is it supposed to be kind of something along those lines, or have you got something? Is it a slightly different angle?
Well, I do have a slightly different angle. There's a lot of books about audio, and most of them tell you how to use a compressor and what an equalizer does, and here's some guidelines on how you would pick what frequencies or set thresholds and stuff, and here's what a reverb unit does. And I have that, and I go into that kind of stuff in great depth. But I also explain how these things work internally and actually show how a certain time, a lot of DSP works, how compressors are actually constructed. There's some schematic diagrams. My goal is, I'm not a math person, and my goal is to explain things in practical, maybe mechanical terms. But so you can really, without getting, into a lot of math and overly technical, but you can still understand a lot of the stuff. I see audio as plumbing, and then there's a lot of similarities between that and, a mixing console is a whole bunch of channels that are the same, and that's not unlike, the plumbing and or electrical wiring, power wiring in a big apartment building. I mean, you got 100 apartments and they're all the same, and they all connect through a common bus. So there's a lot of those kinds of parallels. Transformers are essentially the transmission in an automobile. I mean, they really are exactly the same. They exchange, voltage and current ratios, just the way a transmission would exchange speed and torque. So there's a lot of those kinds of practical analogies. I also get in great depth into human perception, how we hear, the masking effect, because that's so important for assessing equipment, and I think understanding our own hearing foibles and limitations is important. So there's, and I also define fidelity in great detail. There's a lot of, it's really very, very detailed, but without a lot of math, I guess. So I think that's what makes it unique.
It's interesting you mentioned the kind of automobile or the engine paradigm, and because I mean I noticed in the introduction to the book that you said that that was your first introduction to kind of how things work, was sort of tinkering with two-stroke lawnmower engines to make go-karts and that kind of stuff. So you're very much a kind of practical, hands-on kind of guy. Are you the guy that everybody goes to when stuff needs fixing as well?
Oh boy, I sure am. I make videos for friends. I fix everybody's computer, and if they're not here, I help them on the phone. Yeah, I'm the tech support guy.
So what kind of motivated you to write this book? Because I mean, looking at your public persona, sort of that is represented through the presentations that you do and the forums and that kind of thing. You seem to be very much about kind of like, no, this is actually you should understand how this works before you could kind of say what you think is happening.
Right. Well, I'm interested in how things work, and I know a lot of people aren't. There's a lot of recording engineers that really don't care at all how an equalizer works and how phase shift, when you mix, a signal with a phase shifted version, that gives you a change in the response. A lot of people don't care about that, but a lot of people do care about that, and I care about that. So I'm aiming for those people, but I also come at this from a consumerist perspective. And it's no secret that I get into, let's say, scuffles sometimes in forums with people. And I'm really not interested in converting what I call believers. If somebody wants to believe this or that about audio gear, that's fine. My concern is for the people who really do want to know, do I have to spend $1,000 on speaker wire to get the best results? Do I really have to pay this much money? Because this is so common. If somebody will come to a forum, I only have $200. What should I get? And so I, a lot of my emphasis is on consumerism, as well as explaining how things really work. And when you understand how stuff really works, you know what's important and you know what's not important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I noticed that in your sort of in the sort of history of the articles that you've written, I mean, there's quite a lot of stuff about like that. Say for the Sound Blaster. I mean, have you been kind of known as the Sound Blaster guy because you were at the time when that was commercially available? I'm not sure if it's actually still available as the Sound Blaster. Kind of saying, well, as a sound card, it's kind of fine as long as you get some other stuff right. You're kind of do okay with that. I mean, do you find yourself you've become inadvertently sort of the champion of the technical underdog, as it were, in terms of or certainly the how much gear costs?
Yes, I do like to think of myself as a champion of the underdog. And, when somebody is new to recording and their mixes sound terrible, their sound card is usually not the real reason. But I do want to clarify something. I am not a champion of Sound Blaster cards. I have one in my current computer. In fact, I've had one for a number of years because I create a lot of my own samples in the sound font format. It's just a format I've been using forever, and I'm familiar with it. And it's a perfectly good format. It's based on WAV files, and whatever quality you can get into a WAV file, you can get back out in sound fonts. And the way the editing software works, it's free from Creative Labs, but you have to have a physical sound blaster in your card. You could think of it as almost as copy protection, and that's just how they do it. But I don't advocate that. That's not my main sound card. It's never been my main sound card. Right now I have a Focusrite. Before that I had an M Audio. I had a a Card D Plus. It cost a lot of money, back in the 90s. So I'm not a booster of cheap stuff, and I'm not opposed to good stuff. I like nice things. I have nice things, but I like to think I know where to spend money and where you can save money.
Oh, that's an interesting. I mean, coming back to the book, I mean, there's quite a lot of stuff in there about myth busting. And I know when, you did your 2009 AES presentation, there was a lot of stuff about, the jars of rocks and the kind of, $20,000 power cable and that kind of thing. I mean, do you think that we often look for reasons other than our own ability when it comes to why our music should sound better?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people are looking for this magical bullet that will, transform their crappy mixes into something that sounds pristine and professional and clear. And that's not, of course, that's not where it is. It's knowing how to use an equalizer, knowing what to compress, knowing what not to compress. And it's mostly knowledge. And of course, my interest in acoustics is not because I sell acoustic products. I sell acoustic products because I really believe that that's where the biggest gains are to be made. If you are recording in a bedroom and you have a lot of reflecting surfaces nearby, it's going to sound hollow and off mic and boxy because of that. And no matter how good a mic you have, or preamp, or whatever outboard you have, is not going to overcome, bad acoustics.
Sure.
Same with mixing.
I'm having a little bit of a bandwidth issue. Our video seems to have gone off, but I will, what I'm going to do quickly there is just switch out. If I switch off my video, then that'll conserve matters. I mean, the other thing that, actually, Happy Fun Team in the chat room wants to know, what Focusrite do you use, just out of interest? Oh,
fortunately, everything dropped out and I don't.
Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to hang up and come back to everybody, okay? Let's try that. Sorry, folks. See if we can get everybody back. I have group video. It's always doing this to me. Seems to keep... right. Let's try this then. Hello, everybody. Anybody there still? Hello. Hello. How are we doing?
Good.
I knew it was too good to be true. The Skype monster has eaten us up. Ethan, can you still hear me?
Well, Jesus, what was a second ago? Wait, that's better.
Is that better?
Yes, we're back.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stick with audio. Oh no, we got video as well. That's cool. So if I just come back to here we are, and I switch back to here. I was just going to say actually what Happy Fun Team in the chat room was just saying, what is the Focusrite you use out of interest? We're not looking for product endorsements here, but people are generally interested in the facts and figures of the gear that we use.
Right. Well, and I spend quite a bit of detail. There's a lot of detail in the book about how gear is spec'd and what the specs mean, and how specs vary, and maybe even most important, how the various specs relate to audibility. Is the difference between 0.001% distortion and 0.005% distortion is really, it's not audible. Yeah, one is twice as much distortion as the other, but in both cases, it's too soft to hear. So who cares?
Right. Well, that's. There's also some very interesting points you make about how listening tests should be conducted, and how one of the things about the AES presentation was just brilliant. There was just the other talkers, Poppy Crumb and JJ, were sort of just demonstrating how we could be so easily influenced to what we think we hear and what we're listening for. I mean, almost the fact that we're actually listening for something will influence the results of a test, and I find that a fascinating subject. In fact, I think we talked about it at the time, just how the perception of things can work. So,
Yeah, well, you can play the same mix twice in a row, and nothing's changed, and it can sound different. And some of that is your head. I mean, if you move your head literally 4 inches, you'll get a different frequency response at both ears. And some of it is just perception. You can't focus on everything at once. And one time you might listen to the ping of the cymbal, and the next time you might listen to the fullness and the tone of the bass. And you can't hear all that stuff at once. So, people will get up or they'll, change a wire from, one brand to another, and all of a sudden they hear this little delicate, hi-hat figure. Say, oh, this is so much clearer. But it was just like that 5 minutes ago. It's just they weren't noticing it. Not that everything sounds the same, but a lot of times things do sound the same, and people don't really realize it.
So this led me to my next question, which is, so how do we know when something is good, if that's the case?
Well, there's two things. There's pure fidelity, and there's sometimes intentional deviation from high fidelity that still sounds good. A lot of people like the sound of analog tape. I don't think anybody could argue that it's higher fidelity than modern digital, because if you go by the standard specs of frequency response, distortion, signal to noise, and time-based errors, and in time-based meaning wow and flutter and stuff, which digital doesn't have, digital beats analog tape hands down, but a lot of people prefer the sound of analog tape, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. I like that effect on some things. But it's important to distinguish those two things. One is, whether it's fidelity and what's preference. With preference, and when you're mixing, anything goes. If you want to add a distortion plugin with a little bit of distortion, a whole lot of distortion, that's fine. But once you get the mix sounding exactly as you want, I would think the goal would then be to preserve it on the distribution medium, whether it's a CD or a high bitrate MP3 file or whatever.
Well, I suppose in some respects that kind of undermines the whole argument for audio fidelity and audiophile, as 90% of the world is listening to stuff on crummy MP3 distributions or various other kind of compression methods. I mean, so how do those two things reconcile?
Well, I don't know if they have to reconcile. Personally, I find that once the bit rate is, 256 kbps, I think MP3 sounds fine. I'm 63 years old. My frequency, the highest frequency I can hear is about 14 kilohertz if I really crank it. So not that high frequencies is the issue with MP3s. That's not really the loss. The loss is more that kind of hollow gurgling sound you get as other frequencies within the mid-range and bass range are removed. But I don't really think I don't really think that that's relevant. You should aim for as high as fidelity as possible everywhere, and then people will have to accept what they accept. I think some of I don't buy music from online stores, but I think some of them you can pay like $1 a track for, MP3s, and you can pay higher for FLAC or some other higher quality modes. So, I think people can pay for whatever they want. And that's kind of outside of my domain and my interest. I'm interested in how the technology works and how the degradation happens and what's audible and what's not. But what people choose to buy is not a big concern to me.
I got you. So, what is the kind of weakest link in your kind of average setup? Where is it that you kind of think that, you spoke about acoustic, that side of things. Is that really the room treatment? Because you also have real traps, which are commercially available acoustic treatments. They're pre-made and custom made as well, right?
We do some custom stuff, but it's mostly pre-made. And we also do consulting. Sometimes people don't want the look of panels at all. And if they have enough money to do that, of course, it costs more. We'll do consulting and tell them how to build stuff in so that it doesn't even show. But if you want to know in order, I would say the order, and let's just talk about playback, as opposed to a recording live room, but just for a mix room or a listening room for a hi-fi person. The room is certainly the worst. The frequency response is going to have a span of at least 25 or 30 and sometimes 40 dB peaks and nulls. There'll be a really deep null at 60 hertz, a big peak at 72 hertz, a really big null. It's a roller coaster. And these are, typically in a bedroom size space, even a large bedroom, even a modest sized living room, you're going to have a whole pile of 30, 40 dB peaks and nulls differences. No loudspeaker is that bad. Even the cheapest piece of junk, cheap loudspeakers generally will have resonances, and they'll fall off at the low end, they'll fall off at the high end, but they're not going to have the incredibly skewed response that a room has. So then second would be the loudspeakers. Third would be microphones, and then all the electronic stuff is after that. High quality electronics is a commodity item. You can buy, perfectly good stuff for $100.
Yeah, I mean there's been that. I don't know if it is a myth, but where it's been said, that essentially the kind of converter chips in most A to D stuff or D to A stuff comes from the same sort of 3 product lines, and it's really about the kind of power supply and the case and the plugging in of the various features. I mean, I don't know how true that is in entirety, but the difference, I guess, it just illustrates that the difference between them is not generally so wild that your music will just be unlistenable if you use X or Y.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't even know how much difference a power supply makes. I mean, people that do this stuff for a living are generally competent. And, if you design something and the power supply is lousy, then it's, then it's not good. But I don't think that's the case. I think most stuff is reasonably competently made. And in fact, I find most of the incompetence in the hi-fi world, in the really, really expensive stuff from hi-fi. I saw a pair of speakers at a hi-fi show once that were $16,000 a pair, and they were absolutely the worst. They were worse than a pair of Behringer passives. I mean, I'm not kidding. They had resonators built onto them as if a loudspeaker should resonate. They had, I think it was 2 or 3 4-inch drivers. That was, this is what they're selling for $16,000. I see this with hi-fi tube amps that blow up if you don't have something hooked up to the input, or if the speaker wire falls off, the whole thing blows up, and in literally 10 or 15% distortion. So, but other than that, I think most stuff is good enough. Or to put it in the terms that I usually do, that's not the reason your products, your productions suck. Is not because of the gear.
Do you think we're just not man enough or woman enough to take the fact that actually we just suck? Generally.
Yeah, well, I mean, even a mix that you make that's good will sound good to you one day and sound bad another day. I've learned that, I think my living room home theater setup, it sounds really, really good. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are recording engineers and musicians, and they come over here to watch stuff on Blu-ray. But I found that if I tell somebody, oh, you got to come over and hear my setup, it sounds great. They come over, and while we're both listening, it sounds worse to me, and
but that's down to perception, isn't it? That's down to your insecurities as a human being rather than anything else, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. But that again is another interesting point about listening tests. PJ, you actually have this book, and I know that you were kind of interested about Ethan when this came up. Was there anything in there particularly that kind of resonates with you that you would like to maybe share with us?
Well, I just have a question sort of along the same lines of the way that you've been going, Nick, and that is that if it is down to best practices, which I fully believe, in terms of generating listenable music and good quality mixes and that kind of thing, what would Ethan's recommendation be for people who are getting into audio engineering, some of whom I'm sure are listening to our show? In terms of where should they go? What would be some of the places that you would recommend in this day and age where the mentorship is kind of falling down in our industry for people to learn best practices and to practice them and get feedback?
Well, I really believe in one-on-one tutoring. And obviously a book like mine is good. But if somebody's a real beginner, they may not understand some of the terminology, though I really do start at the beginning. I make the point I have a page on my website, ethanweiner.com. If you just go there, there's a link right away to a page that describes my book. And I make the point that it's, it's not a dummies book for beginners, but in many ways it really is. I mean, it really starts at the beginning and explains everything in plain English. But anyways, not to get too far off the track, I think that a one-on-one mentoring is probably the best thing somebody could do if you can find somebody that knows what they're doing and has a personal studio or a real studio. You can, if you buy, I use Sonar, and people use Logic, Pro Tools, Cubase, all the major DAW programs, but they all come with 600-page manuals. And what you want to know is, how do I do what I need to do that applies to me, and how do I find exactly what I want to do now? I'm trying to insert this thing and I can't figure it out, and nobody wants to sit there and read a manual for 2 weeks. So I think, paying somebody, $100, a couple $100 to sit with you for a few hours, maybe even come to your place, is probably the most valuable. I think that's the most valuable way to learn. But obviously, this is such a huge subject. How do you learn about music production? Well, you listen to music. I mean, it's kind of almost too big a question.
No, I take your point there. I mean, but it's also valid because I mean the thing is there are lots of kids who are coming up who are coming just purely through an in the box route, and they're kind of buying Massive and a couple of preferred drum sources, and they're just hammering the stuff into whatever bus compressor because that's seen as the perceived way to create music of that style and that genre, and it's kind of completely bypassing the whole kind of technical expertise side of things, which is quite interesting, yet it's still achieving commercially successful results. And I mean, I guess some of it is probably deconstructed and reconstructed again in professional studios, but some of it makes it from, the 1/8 inch out of the laptop into the outside world, essentially. And that's interesting. That sort of found knowledge is also seems to be happening quite a lot as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge proponent of in the box. I don't have any outboard gear. I used to when I first set up my current studio. I've been at this house for 18 years, and when just before I moved here, I actually started buying gear. And then when I moved here, I set it up and I bought more stuff. I had outboard synths, and lots of outboard gear. And then eventually, when Sonar came out. I wasn't a big fan of Cakewalk, and I was using a SAW Studio before that. But when Cakewalk came out with Sonar and integrated MIDI and audio, I said, this is the way to go. And my partner and I both sold all our gear, all our outboard gear. Obviously, you need a mixer for monitoring, and you need preamps and stuff to get stuff in. But I think that you can do everything. And of course, the paradigm of modern DAW programs is a big professional studio. It's everything you would have in a big professional studio. And you can even buy a control surface. I don't personally like those, though I understand people do. I don't find mixing with a mouse, so to speak, to be a problem. But I understand that people like a control surface. But I just personally don't see anything you can do with outboard gear that you can't do in the box. And if you like distortion, if you want subtle analog sound, there are plugins for that, and I think they're good enough.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, Gaz, what do you think about the whole concept of having to have a sort of, is a technical basis required? I mean, I suppose if you're recording, it's more important than if you're just kind of messing about with software synths and what have you, right?
Well, the thing that's on my mind was I did a session on Saturday with a producer called David Tickle, and David Tickle has got an incredible. He's produced some serious stuff. He mixed all the classic Prince albums, Purple Rain, and that era, and loads of stuff. My Sharona. Yeah. But he produced
the Knack, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, working under Mike Chapman, but he recorded and mixed it. But he, as a producer, he's worked with loads and loads of people. Incredible. I was so impressed. Split End, someone says. Yes, he did. But now, what was interesting and relevant is with him producing, he was nothing. It was not about the equipment at all. It was all about the music and the vibe and the performance and making everyone relaxed, and equipment wasn't even an issue at all. I mean, there was an engineer on the job, so I suppose this is a slightly deferred, but the point I'm trying to say though is that he used Pro Tools in a very minimal kind of way, because he was trying to get everything at source, and it's just that thing. I often mention this, but when you get it at source and you get the feeling and the mood right, if you put that onto like a cassette or something, if the feel was good, the audience would listen and like it. People are really sensitive to the feel of music, I think, and so I think getting the feel right, the equipment matters less. That's
that's an interesting point. I know, Rich, are you at what point do you have to say no, we have to do that properly now because the recording or the take or whatever, there may be something wrong? What is the kind of lower end of the threshold, and how much is there a kind of point of no return where you just think, hey, look, that's the take, it's just going to have to do and you have to work with it? Or are there kind of perceptual points at which it's like, no, that's nobody's going to go for that? I mean, if you see,
I was recently provided a concert DVD of us in which the audio was almost exact. It was squared. It was just a box. And I tried the currently available tools just to see how close they would get. and they got it a little closer, but nowhere near acceptability. So there is a level of, for example, audio disruption that is still to this day unrecoverable. But
sure,
that
clipping.
said, pardon?
Yeah, clipping. Yeah, I mean, once it's clipped, it's gone.
There are some cool declipping algorithms that for short-term burst kind of events will do a fairly decent job that prevents you from having to pencil your way through it, of trying to recover a transient, for example, or a series of transients, or kick drums, or whatever. But when you get to the whole mix being like that, it was just completely unrecoverable. But anyway, but to get the basic point here is, no, it's not the gear. Yes, it's the person.
I suppose. I mean, clipping that's it, because it's so distorted that you can only take a couple of little bits and bobs are not such a problem. And you listen to some of the old Motown or Hendrix recordings, and there are moments in there, very short, admittedly, where it's like, oh, that's a little bit on the edge. But I guess with tape, it's a bit more forgiving. But so, I mean, there are areas where that can happen. But there's sort of stuff like, I don't know where. I mean, for instance, I guess if a vocalist is mumbling because they haven't written the lyrics yet, but they can never recapture that. I mean, I don't know how far you can go. I mean, that's more of an artistic thing, I guess, than an audio thing. But
but that's operator error. I mean, that's nothing to do with the gear. If somebody isn't watching the meters when they're recording and it's 10 dB over clipping, that's operator error.
Yeah, I guess so. I just thought it was interesting to maybe think about what the parameters of acceptability are, because as we listen to MP3s and as we listen to things in different lower qualities, our perception is going to shift. If I've got at home a massively expensive hi-fi listening room where I can hear every detail, and I still, one of my most endearing memories is of the KD Lang album Ingenue, which is one of the most beautifully recorded albums I've ever heard. It's not electronic at all, but I listened to that on a pair of quad electrostatic EL63s, and I could just hear, how tall the guitarist was, how far away the fiddle player. I don't know whether that was constructed in the mix or whether that was because there was a room involved and that's where they all stood, but it was almost an ecstatic moment of audio pleasure that I've yet to recreate anywhere else. But all I'm saying is, if I've got, depends what I'm used to listening to as to what we consider to be good enough or acceptable in that environment. And listen to FM radio, that really screws with the sound massively once they've put it through their secret sauce algorithms. So it's not necessarily how it was first intended to be made, but there's this sort of what's the word I'm looking for? There's a norm which gets applied, which is kind of outside of the artist's control. I mean, PJ, you probably find that a little bit, particularly because you're working to picture a lot, and TVs are particularly brutal when it comes to mastering and allowable dynamic range. I mean, do you find there are ways that you can compensate for that? Or do you just kind of leave it to chance?
A lot of things are left to chance, especially if you're providing stems to someone else or to a video editing company and they're monkeying with your audio. There's not a whole lot I can do. I just try to provide them with the best work that I can in the allowable time frame. And to the previous points of all of the guests, I completely agree on a creative level that it has very little to do with the gear, the capturing of a performance. I mean, within reason, obviously, and everybody here is eminently reasonable. However, that being said, once you get beyond that point and you're involved in creating your own music or involved in doing it with others in a collaborative process, there's in my humble opinion, and I will qualify this there, and Ethan speaks to this in his book. There is obviously the imparting of character that certain devices can do in this within the signal path, and for me personally, there's an uncanny valley. If you compare it to three-dimensional rendering in video, so special effects in movies have gotten extremely good. To where people can watch a film and not tell where digital imagery was inserted and where it wasn't. In other cases, it's misapplied. I think we're really approaching that in terms of audio and the plugins available. However, there are a few places where there's still that 3 or 4%, and you have to ask yourself as an artist whether or not the price disparity, and there's usually a heavy one, is worth it to you, or if the working style or the way in which you're able to implement these tools is worth it to pay the price for the outboard gear. And in my case, in certain circumstances, it was worth it to make those purchases at this point. And I think that's something that really needs to be considered. But I agree entirely with all of Ethan's arguments and the other guest statements in terms of the veracity of plugins and performance being key and vibe being key to the success of a recording on a creative level and a listening level.
Do you think that I mean, because you've just invested heavily in kind of some really beautiful equipment. I mean, what was your thought process as to why you required that to sort of take your work forward, or is it because it gives you a certain sound, or does it give you a kind of subliminal confidence that allows you to do things more easily? I mean, how does that work from that sense?
For me, part of it was workflow. It was simply the capturing of things at source. So if I run audio signals through specific signal paths, there's a discernible difference to my ears. And to me, tone is the trip. And part of this had to do with I've spoken privately about this, but some health issues that I've had, and having sort of come out the other side of those, and sort of cleared up, sort of gotten myself into a space where I can appreciate the subtle differences where I wasn't able to for many years before that. So it's that, but the other is in the case of all the gear that I chose for this room, everything has a specific purpose to me. So it's kind of like choosing a brush for a very specific reason, and everything was chosen for a very specific reason, and most of it was to achieve a result in as timely a fashion as I possibly can. And I think that I could probably get very close with the tools in the box, but it would take me longer to do it that way.
So speed and workflow kind of do make sense to a degree. I just wanted to come back to Ethan there a minute, because one of the things that famously also you seem to come under an awful lot of attack by almost audiophile zealots and people that kind of have a very strong opinion. I mean, the internet is obviously a place for debate, and this tends to happen. I mean, why do you think people are so bipolar, if you like, about this subject? What is it? Why can't they compromise? What do you think it is that makes people so focused on being right?
Well, everybody wants to be right.
Yeah,
but I think some of it is people that, as they say, drank the Kool-Aid and dropped $12,000 on a whole bunch of channels of high-end compressors, really hate when somebody else comes in and says, well, the $100 per channel stuff sounds just as good. You can't tell the difference. And they get really mad at that. And then they say, well, sure I can. I said, well, then you come over to my place. You're only an hour away. I'll come over to your place and let's do a test. And so, well, tests don't tell anything, no. If you're telling me that this is garbage and your thing is pristine, and I switch back and forth and you can't tell, so they get very mad because I don't back down. I think that's part of it also. Right. I'm awfully certain of my positions. Not that I'm always right, and I've been proven wrong. I have a whole list of things I've been wrong about over the years. I actually I have this text file, and it's got like a dozen things in there. And one of these days I'm going to write an article, say, here's what I was wrong about, just because there are people that absolutely refuse to ever change their opinion. And I'm glad to change my opinion. Just give me some facts, give me some proof, play it for me, and convince me. But don't tell me I have to believe you just because you have a whole bunch of, mixes that are #1 hits. That doesn't mean you understand the stuff. It doesn't, how the technology works. It doesn't mean you understand hearing perception and all the frailties. It just means that you know how to turn the knobs and make stuff sound good. So I don't back down. I'm pretty opinionated. But another thing that I think is a factor, and not to disagree with what PJ was saying, because I think that there are situations in certain ways that you get used to working that is faster to get a good sound. But I have noticed, because I used to do professional recording, for many years. I had a big major studio in the early 80s, 1980s, and we did all kinds of stuff for famous clients and a lot of things. And I noticed that some sessions just stink and some just sound great. One of the best sessions I ever did was believe it or not, a big band polka band. And they had, it was a big band with the whole deal. But they played polka music, and it just sounded great. You put the mics up, you just set everything to flat, and just get reasonable levels on the board, and it sounded great. And other things, you get these, punk bands that come in, and you got some piano player that plays nonstop, pounding out, the muddy octave below middle C, and bass player is lousy, and strings are ringing on the low note while he's playing high notes and stuff, and it's a mess. Some things just sound good. So I think that what sometimes happens is somebody will do a session that's like that, and then they'll buy some new gear, and then the next session they do is one of those good ones, and I say, wow, that gear really makes a difference. And no, it wasn't the gear at all. And I'm not saying that all gear is the same. I feel I have to keep saying that because I'm accused of saying that, just like I'm accused of being a Sound Blaster proponent. But I think that's as much of it. I think that's often responsible for the people saying, I bought this thing and it was so much easier to get a good sound, because every session really is different. Every group is different. Every instrumentation is different, and musical arrangements are key. In the old days, and I mean the 1800s, EQ and sculpting, as they call it now, was done by the composer and the arranger, and they wouldn't have the cellos playing high stuff that competed with the low notes of the viola, and they knew what different instrument groups sound good and what ranges. And now a lot of times, if the band doesn't know how to do that, the engineer has to do that, and some jobs just require more of that than others.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. One other point that I should really point out now, I've just realised that we've been chatting away, I've completely forgotten to mention our sponsors, who, if you give me a couple of minutes, I can just quickly say thank you very much to Yamaha for their continued sponsorship of the show. Obviously, in terms of... let me just switch that. Yes. Okay. Yes, there we are. The video there. Now, if you actually are watching on video, you'll be able to see this lovely video of the Yamaha 01V96i, which is a compact digital audio console. Just reviewed it, actually, and I was quite impressed. The mic amp sounded really quite impressive. Like I said, a lot of gain on the ribbon mic that we use here, and just very nice and quiet. But it's got a whole lot more besides. You've also got 40 mixing channels, 32 mono, 4 stereo, 16 analog and 8 digital inputs, 8-channel ADAT-IO as standard. There's also a YGD-AI slot for additional I/O options. So Yamaha make a number of those for AudioNet and CobraNet and AES and more analog channels, etc., etc. It basically has 16 in, 16 out on USB audio as well, and this is 24-bit 96K full streaming I/O, which is astonishing, really. I didn't even know that it could squeeze down a tube of that size, but that works very nicely as well, because you can then patch the inserts and the in and out points within your DAW and integrate that into the channels as well. And there's a whole lot of other features as well. You've got 24-bit 96K operation, 8 auxes, 8 buses, 100mm motorized faders, up to 4 effects simultaneously at 24, 41, 48K. Goes down to 2 when you're at 96. These include the VCM effects, which are modeled effects for the stomp boxes, EQs, compressors, as well as all the standard SPX class effects that you would come to expect from a Yamaha digital console. Anyway, we want you to try one out. If you're interested, you can go to a Pulse store within the UK. These are kind of bigger stores within stores where they have a larger range of Yamaha gear. Try one out, maybe take a drive down, record some sound into it, take it home and listen to it in the quality of your own home. Or if you're in the US, any of the major Yamaha dealers should have one. And there's a bit.ly URL which you can use, bit.ly/01V96i. That's bit.ly/01V96i. And once again, we thank Yamaha for their continued sponsorship of the show. Right, I've excused us that little commercial interlude. There was another couple of questions that I had lined up, which I'm just going to have to dig around. But if anyone else wants to chip in, because I realise I've been rather monopolising Ethan here, but it's my show, so I suppose I can. But if anyone else has any other questions, I know, Rich, I mean, you use the Real Trap stuff, don't you? I mean, is that... Do you find acoustic treatment can make a really radical difference, or does it just sort of tighten up the edges?
I'll go with really radical difference for 1,000, Alex. Really radical difference in our room.
Right. And I guess, I mean, because a lot of things, looking at the, again, I keep referring back to this 2009 AS presentation you did, Ethan, there's a lot of it's about comb filtering and the radical difference that there is between just small movements and changes in sound source. I mean, is that something, how hard is that to deal with acoustically?
It's not hard at all. Comb filtering is mostly a mid and high frequency issue, which is solved with relatively thin absorbing panels. The larger problem in most rooms, home sized rooms, home studio sized rooms, and even some professional rooms, I mean, until you get to 40 by 50 feet, the major problem is the bass because it requires much thicker absorbers and a lot of them. Comb filtering, and reflections are placement dependent. I mean, loudspeaker reflection points are on the side walls and the ceiling, and in a live room situation recording, if you have a low ceiling, you want something directly above your overhead mics. If you have an acoustic guitar player that's 2 feet away from a reflecting wall, you want something there. But that kind of stuff is pretty easily solved with relatively thin absorber panels. But the bass is really the problem. The bigger problem.
Yeah, I guess because physically those things just have to be big and will take up room in any kind of space, right?
Right. Yeah, and the wavelengths are long, and it's a little technical to explain, though there's certainly lots of drawings in my book that show that. But yeah, the enough of the wave has to fit within the thickness of the material, I guess would be the short way to say it. And if a wave is 20 feet long, then and you need at least part of the quarter of a wave of it to fit in the material. So 4, 6, 8 inch even thick absorbing material works a whole lot better and to a much lower frequency than 1 or 2 inch stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm guessing in your job you must have to deal with let me see how that the mercurial tastes of the interior decorator as well. So
well, with home studios, a lot of people can do whatever they want because it's their own room, and a lot of hi-fi people have a dedicated room. That's a really good trend. And sometimes we get people coming to us, they're hi-fi people, and they know that their living room is terrible, and they say, well, I know what I need stuff, but my wife objects. I say, well, okay, well, when something changes, give us a call. Because I mean, what else are you going to do? And of course we have things on panels, and you can put them in when you're going to listen for an hour or two, and you can go put them in the closet. But mostly I sort of don't really worry about that. If you have if you're unable to do stuff for cosmetic reasons, well then that's your problem, not mine.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, that's true.
But I also do want to say, besides comb filtering, which is a skewed frequency response. It's a whole bunch of peaks and nulls in a row that makes that hollow flanged off mic kind of sound, flanging, phasing, what they call the phasing effect, and the peaks and nulls at low frequencies that I was mentioning much earlier, which is also really the same thing. There's also excess ambience. And, people often obsess over, I don't want to make my room too dead. I've heard that a dead room is terrible. And, a dead room is not the end of the world. When a room is totally dead, or at least, all the nearby and strong reflections are tamed, the sound is larger because then you can hear the reverb that's embedded in the recording. I think it's a mistake to think that your small bedroom or your even modest-sized living room is needed to contribute to the overall spaciousness of music. And I'm talking not only for home studios, but also for audiophile listening rooms. I mean, just generally playing music, because reflections off surfaces that are 10 feet away or closer, 15 feet away even, are going to sound near. The reflections come back soon, and they're very strong because of the close proximity. And that drowns out the larger, more lush reverb that's actually in the recording. So usually the effect of adding absorption in a room is to make the sound bigger, not smaller.
Okay, that's interesting. Gaz, I'm looking at you there actually, and you've got a little bit of sound panels going on in your room. And is that purely from a recording point of view, or is that sort of reflection? So what was the kind of?
Yeah, I mean, this studio was only originally meant to be a temporary space, but I've ended up being here for a few years. But so it's only like it's just a little bit. The speakers kind of. I'm sure Ethan could probably find a much better setup for it. But it's just, yeah, it does help a little bit. And I've also got the KRK Ergo in here, which I would be interested to see what Ethan would think about.
Is that the digital? That's the one that auto corrects to the room? Is that right?
Yeah, it comes with a measurement microphone, then puts some sounds out the speakers, and then it sort of takes some, and then it just kind of EQs the output to try and sort of eliminate lumps and bumps and stuff. And I really, really like it a lot. You can bypass it and listen to it with it on and off, and with it when it's on, it's a much more stable, solid image. It sounds, and the bass is so much nicer. So it does work for me. So I'm not sure, if you did well.
I was going. Yeah, no, I was going to.
That's my question.
Yes, that's a very good question. It is too, Ethan. Yes. So
I can talk. Well, I can talk a little bit about that. There are three problems that we've now talked about. There's peaks, there's nulls, and at least for the bass range, and there's ringing, where you play a sine wave for half a second at 50 hertz, and you cut it off suddenly, and depending on whether that frequency rings in your room, it will continue to sound for maybe even a whole second before it's decayed down by 60 dB. There are, probably below 300 hertz, there's probably, 3-4 resonances like that, just looking at what I can see, Gaz, in your on your camera. So EQ, it's the automatic EQ of Ergo and and other systems like that. It's great that they will automatically find the offending resonant frequencies and reduce them, but that's all they can do is lower the peaks. You can't raise a null. You really can't, because the nulls are 20, 30 dB deep compared to the flat level response, and they can't change the ringing. And when these things first came out, some of the vendors were claiming that they could fix all this stuff, and they would claim that they could fix it for every seat in the house. And now they've gotten a little less aggressive in their marketing because it's just not true. But certainly, in a room where the peaks are the bigger problem, absolutely that kind of EQ can help. It's still not as good as bass traps because it won't bring up the nulls, which are in most rooms the bigger problem. I see it looks like a wall behind PJ is pretty close behind, and if you're PJ, are you sitting at your mix position?
No, I'm not. No.
So when you mix, you don't have a wall like 5 feet behind you?
No, I do not. No, the wall is, I would say, I'm not exactly sure. I haven't measured from exactly the mix position, but it's at least 4 feet beyond that. And there's a bass trapping in that wall. The entire rear wall is a bass trap.
Right, and that's really important, because without that, usually the nulls become the bigger problem. I think the most common problem that I see in forums are people say, I made a mix, it sounds great in my control room. When I play it in the car, it sounds totally tubby and boomy. And that's because they are in a null in their control room. Well, not a null, there's probably 3 nulls, but usually there's one really bad one between 80 hertz, 100 hertz, 120, somewhere right in the fullness range. And so they add too much bass to compensate. So in most rooms, in my experience, bedroom size spaces and a little bigger, nulls are the bigger problem. But some rooms, especially square rooms or 2-to-1 rooms, meaning like 10 feet by 20 feet, or 3 meters by 6 meters for you guys, often peaks can be the bigger problem. So the EQ can fix the peaks. But Gaz, I bet you if you put in 10 bass traps in there, you'd go, whoa, this is better.
What is it that causes a null, actually, Ethan? I mean, because this is a phenomenon I've not been familiar with. What is it that actually causes that?
Well, all acoustic problems are caused by reflections off the walls, floor, and ceiling, all of them. But considering just the wall behind you, because that's usually where the worst of these problems come from, the sound comes out of the speakers, goes past your ears, and of course you hear it as it goes past your ears, hits the wall behind you, and then comes back towards the speakers. And so the sound coming from the speakers collides, if you will, and butts heads with the sound coming back off the wall. And depending on the relative phase, which depends entirely on the current frequency and the current distance, I mean, if the thing is 10 feet away and you're 80 hertz, whatever, you'll either get a peak or a null or something in between.
So it's to do with the phase of the frequencies as they pass each other, effectively.
Exactly, and as they collide in the air. And in a real room, it's not only a single reflection off the rear wall, but when sound doesn't go like a laser beam, it spreads outward, so it hits the back wall, but some of it bounces off at an angle, hits the side. So the frequency response at any given cubic centimeter in a room is the result of the direct sound from the speaker plus a whole lot of competing reflections. And that's why you can measure, and there's examples in my book and also on my 2 websites, of measuring the frequency response in a bedroom-sized space, moving the microphone 4 inches. And which isn't even this which is smaller than the space between your two ears. And the response at low frequencies is totally different. And I remember getting into a big argument with online saying, well, the wavelength of, 40 hertz is like 30 feet long or whatever. And, so you'd have to go at least a quarter wavelength to go from a peak to a null. And that's not true. I mean, it's just not, because there's so many different reflections, all combining. And even as low as, 20, 30 hertz, you can go from a peak to a null just a couple inches away. So, but all these problems, whether it's ringing, flutter, echo, excess ambience, too much reverb, peaks, nulls, all of that stuff is all caused by reflections, and all of that stuff doesn't exist outdoors, at least if you climb up a flagpole.
Well, I mean, it must be an incredibly difficult job to actually measure and counteract that. I mean, do you have to take a kind of fairly blunt approach to it, or can you be really kind of tweaky about dealing with those?
Well, both. I mean, you can solve 90% of your problems with with one of my company's room kits. And not to plug my company, other companies sell effective products too. But that's what I often tell people. Just buy our standard room kit. Stick to stuff where it shows on that drawing on our website, and you're going to be 90% of the way there, maybe completely there. And you can get tweaky if you want. But again, because these things change over such small distances, where you put the measuring mic is important if you want to measure. I mean, and you don't really need to measure. As Richard will tell you, put in a bunch of treatment and the difference is obvious. It's not a placebo effect. It's a real improvement. But if you measure and you move the mic a little bit, you have a completely different response. So how are you going to compensate for that? Really, all you can do is put as many bass traps as you can manage, whether it's you're limited by space or available corners or what your wife will allow or how much money you have. But that's why I use the word manage. As many bass traps as you can manage, and absorption at all the reflection points and near recording surfaces near where you're going to record if you also record. And that's really all you need. It's not as complicated as people think, and it's not as complicated as some people want you to believe.
So one question that KSR80 alluded to in the chat room, what happens if you turn the volume down? Is there an optimum volume for a particular size room to monitor at? I mean, No,
acoustics is purely linear. And when you get up to like 160 or something dB SPL, then the air actually does compress. And you can get some of that in the throat of high compression drivers, the really big compression drivers, the horn drivers they use for, 10,000 seat venues. But other than that, acoustics is purely linear. Whatever happens at 40 dB SPL happens exactly the same at 80 and 100 and 110. In any reasonable sound level. It's all when sometimes people are told, well, if you have acoustic problems, just monitor softly and that solves the problems. Well, really, it doesn't really. It might put some of the echoes below the threshold of audibility, so you don't hear the echoes anymore, but the peaks and nulls are still the same.
Yeah, I suppose the only thing that might become an issue is things resonating at different volumes, because they're going to be
well, but they
off.
still resonate. A buzzing windowsill or things like that they won't buzz until you get to a certain volume, and then all of a sudden they start rattling. But that's different from natural resonance in the room caused by the parallel walls and the sound bouncing back and forth between the walls.
That's the cheap vinyl in my 1990 model Ford, which at certain speeds on the motorway just kind of rattles really irritatingly, and you constantly trying to poke things into the gaps to stop that from happening. Don't really want to do that in your listening environment, really, if you can help that, I suppose.
Well, I always tell people that's one of the most revealing things you can do is play a low frequency sine wave sweep, as you would get from room measuring software that starts at 20 hertz and goes up to 300 hertz, and play it really loud. Not so loud you're going to blow up your speakers, but really loud. And you'll hear all kinds of buzzes, and those buzzes and rattles are there when you're playing music, but you don't really hear it usually because of the masking effect. And that's why I always kind of am amused by the audiophile beliefs that some of these things like jitter that are 100 and plus dB down below the music have an audible effect. They say, well, even if you can't hear it, it affects your perception. Like, no, it doesn't. You can't hear your windows buzzing. They're like 20, 22 dB below, that bass note. The top 20 or 30 dB is really what matters the most, I think. It's just I'm trying to be practical here.
Yeah, well, and that seems to be, the kind of watchword really for the whole of what you do. Ethan, I think we're kind of getting now to the point of closure. I want to thank you very much for your time. I wish you every success with your book. You can find out details about it on ethanweiner.com. You can buy it on Amazon and you could get it for Kindle as well. I noticed. Was that so? That's
right.
That's
and I'll
cool.
also mention I'll try not to turn this into too much of a sales pitch or too long. When I started talking up my book, it's coming. It'll be ready in a couple months. It'll be ready in a month. A lot of people ask, how can I get a signed copy? And I couldn't see any practical way other than to sell it myself. So I do sell it myself. I can't offer the same $5 discount that Amazon does, but I include some bonus content that you don't otherwise get. So I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, cool. And that they can get to that through ethanweiner.com as well, right?
Yeah, right on my homepage there's a big blurb that says, read all about Ethan's book, and it takes you right to a page that describes the book in detail, has a whole table of contents, lists all the videos that come with it, and a lot of the stuff.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ethan. Very much appreciated your time with us. And also to my other guests, we'll say goodbye also to PJ Tracy there, PJ Tracy Sound, who thank you very much for joining us. And you've sounded lovely through your signal path today.
Thank you. My pleasure. And Ethan, thank you for your time. It was a real pleasure to listen to what you have to say. And I just want to say to the audience, anybody that doubts the truth of the last bit of wisdom that Ethan imparted in terms of the top 20, 30 dB being the most important, watch, which I'm sure Nick will probably have a link in the show notes to Ethan's AES 2009 presentation. There's some fascinating video and audio examples in that presentation, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
In fact, I think I can post that into the chat room quickly. There we go. If I put that there, that's it. And I can then switch to it, which means that it'll show up on the screen. Hold on. This is a slightly convoluted way of doing it, but there we go. It's the bottom it's the bottom link there. In fact, Red Walks beat me to it. So once again, thank you very much, PJ. And also Gaz Williams, thank you very much for joining us this week as well. And if you speak, then I will see which window you end up in, but I can't see you at the moment. So
yeah, I was thinking that Ethan must have got a few enemies from that AES conference, so I thought it was. That was
only the people that sell $200 power cords.
Snake oil. But anyway, well, thank you very much, Gaz. Look forward to seeing you very soon, and thank you very much. And also, finally, there, Rich Hilton in sunny Connecticut, where it is in fact sunny. I normally say that anyway, but it actually is. All right, Rich, and I guess you're going to be with us. Are you going to be? Well, actually, there's no show next week because I'm going on holiday. So I don't know if you're going to be on the road, Rich, or what.
I will be leaving the 28th, so I will be on the road, but I may be able to do some of them remotely on my new laptop.
Oh, your new
so we'll try.
Excellent. Well, I bought something new. I've got a new phone. That's my new HTC One X, which is massive. I thought it was a great idea because of my eyesight, but actually I've got really small hands, so I can't operate it one-handed like I thought I was going to. But nonetheless, I'll get used to it. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. That was Sonic Talk number 272. I was actually considering just playing us out with a little bit of... Ethan's got a fantastic... video which he put together some time back of a song composed entirely of cello parts, so I think we should probably have a little bit of that as well. So thank you very much, Ethan. It's been a pleasure having you, and I'll play out with a little bit of your piece.